Appleby here. I thought I'd go through with you some editing techniques that I use on some of my nighttime photos that I put on my Facebook page and on my website. I went out last night and I went up to Bamburgh, and this is the little lighthouse that's just north of the castle. It's where the beach finishes and the rocks start, and as you can see the beams have been caught here, which was quite nice. There was quite a lot of moisture in the air, as you can see by the horizon. It's a little bit misty, but of course that means that the beams of the light actually show up because the particulate in the air is illuminated by the lights. So let me show you the settings if I can. There you go. So 30 seconds, ISO 6400, always a good ISO if your camera can handle it, to show a lot of detail in the stars. You notice some of the stars are blurred or smudged, and that's because of the atmosphere rather than being out of focus. I've got a lens that can focus to infinity by turning it entirely to the right, which is really handy. One of the things people struggle with is actually getting that infinity, so they find that their shots in the dark are very blurry because they don't know what to or how to focus. And one of the good things, if you don't have a lens that you can turn all the way to the right to focus to infinity, find something like these lights on the horizon and use live view, zoom in and focus manually on them. Okay, so what light do we have to play with? Of course, we've got the stars, we've got the beams from the lighthouse itself. You'll also notice that the lighthouse is very well lit up. Now, this is from the castle, which is almost a mile away, well, maybe 3/4 of a mile away. The castle, Bamburgh Castle, has a lot of very big lights on, little floodlights to light the castle up at night time. These are generally pointing north, and therefore all the light spills, and you get this this lighting on all the rocks, and also on the lighthouse in this case. You'll all notice down there, that's the stag that I posted a photograph of earlier. Apparently painted by a World War II prisoner of war, an Italian man. I haven't had that confirmed, but it sounds feasible. Okay, so let's see what we can do now. There's a couple of things that we need to realise. Because I'm using a Samyang 14mm lens, the first thing I'm going to have to do is actually change this curve. If you notice, there's sort of a curve there, which is part of the fisheye type effect that you get with this lens. This is quite easy to do. We're in Lightroom 5. Down here you've got lens corrections. So what we need to do is correct it. And now I know this sounds weird, but this particular profile, because there isn't an official one, I've stored it within the Canon, and at the very bottom there it's got Samyang 14mm 2.8. And that's taken the distortion straight out. It's also lightened the corners a little bit to remove the vignetting. You'll also notice, obviously, I had my foot in a hole because my horizon isn't very straight. That's simply corrected by hitting the crop tool and then using this particular feature here, where you can simply draw a line approximately where you think I think it's about there, where the horizon is, and that will straighten it up. Now, don't worry about the fact that this is pulled in here. We can fix that in Photoshop later. Okay, that's a good start. We'll click done. Right, okay, so because of the atmospherics here, we're not going to get a very clear Milky Way shot here, but we'll see what we can do. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is have a look at the white balance. Now that's very orange, and you've got this spill here, this yellowy orange spill from the lights that are over up the coast. You notice this little bump here. This is Lindisfarne Castle. So that's one good thing about the light pollution. If there is any good thing about light pollution, it does highlight things in the distance. It's quite handy occasionally. So here we go. Let's see what we can do. Now, if we were to correctly white balance this, which of course it's painted white, we can use the eyedropper. Click the eyedropper, and as you can see, that is now perfectly white balanced. This is perfectly white balanced. However, we've got this rather blue sky, which isn't particularly appealing. So by double clicking on the temperature, it goes back to its native setting there. So it's going to have to be done manually. So I'm just going to pull that down until I think it's acceptable. One good trick I can show you is if you turn the vibrance and the saturation all the way up to the top, very, very over processed, but you'll be able to see exactly what's going on in the sky. And the good tip is to see if you can get 50% blue and 50% light pollution. So if you slide that down until you've probably got half and half, so that looks maybe a bit less out there. And once you reset this, it's a good guide to roughly getting the sky right. As it happens, that's quite a pleasing colour, although obviously it's not natural, it's still quite pleasing. I'm quite happy with that, and I think I'll be comfortable moving on. So, the other thing we need to do is put a little bit more contrast in here. As you can see, it's quite low contrast. So we're going to use this graduated filter, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down, and it will keep the graduated filter perfectly parallel with the horizon, pulling it down to around about there. So the first thing I'll do, I think, is maybe bring the exposure down a little, which will darken the top but not the bottom. Then we'll adjust the contrast, bring the contrast up somewhat, again making this nice and dark up here, which I think is quite a pleasing effect. I'm also going to increase the clarity a little bit. Now, as you can see, this makes the stars pop. That's far too much. So let's maybe go at around about 30, maybe 25 or 27. That'll be fine. We're not going to worry about the saturation at the moment. Anything else we want to highlight in here? If we drop the highlights, it takes a little bit of the glow out of it. But in this case, I'm not too worried about that, actually. I think I'm going to bang the exposure up a little as well, and maybe increase the contrast a little. Yeah, okay, I like that. I'm going to keep that. So we'll hit and done. And that's the adjustment done for the sky. Now the other thing we can do is, it's very dark here. I don't think there's much we can do with this, but because I record in this CR2, which is RAW format, basically it records all the information and doesn't compress it or change the information when it's brought into a program like Lightroom or Photoshop. Do you know what? I think this is still a little bit yellowy orange, so what I might do is go along here to this, which is your saturation control. Now this controls all the individual colours, so I will, I think, pull that down just a little bit, maybe to -15, just to take the edge off it there. So looking at the histogram, obviously in a normal histogram, when it's a daylight shot, you want the bump to be there. But of course this isn't there because it's a dark shot, so I think that's okay where it is. And as far as I can see, that's fine. Now the other controls you can get in Photoshop are things like noise and sharpening. I prefer to do mine in another add-on program. Obviously if I was to change the luminescence noise, it will take it straight down like so. It tends to blur quite a lot of the other things. So I'm going to leave that as it was, which is on 0. Okay, so back to the image. Is there anything else we can do? Let's have a look. I don't think I'm going to change the calibration. I think the camera faithful shot is a little bit flat for me, so I'm just going to leave it as the Adobe standard, which I think is quite pleasing. And I think that's it. So we're ready to export it over to Photoshop. So here we go. As you can see, this has gone over. If we zoom in, you'll see it's quite noisy. If that's at 100%, there's quite a lot of noise there. We're going to deal with that in a minute. But what we want to do is maybe do a couple of alterations to it. Now the first thing that really bugs me is the fact that this is nice and vertical, but because of the way the fisheye lens, well, it's not a fisheye lens, but a fisheye effect for a 14mm lens, it's obviously pulled these in a little bit, and we can correct that reasonably easy. So in Photoshop, if you go to edit, the first thing you need to do is change it from a background layer to a standard layer, so you can apply various effects on it. We're going to go to edit, transform, and we're going to go to warp. Now this will put a grid. What this can actually do is any of the intersections or any of the dots, you can actually manipulate that part of the image. So let's say, as you can see, I can move it all around, and this is one way to actually affect the image. Now what we're going to do is we'll just do that again. That was to show you how it works. So warp. Now we need to warp this bit here. Now from experience, if I pull this one, as you can see, that's straightening it up. Now there is compromise, because as you're pulling that one, this one gets pulled, so you don't want to over pull it. Maybe if I pull this one a little bit too, that's probably about like that. That's fine. It hasn't distorted anything else of the features there. It's straightened it up a little bit, which is quite pleasing to me. So I think I'm not going to over warp it. We'll leave it like that and we'll see how that looks. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Now of course we've got a little bit of movement of the image, and therefore along the bottom here we're going to have to crop that out at the end of the day. Now the image itself is quite nice, quite pleasant, but it doesn't really pop. So one of the filters, if you're ever looking for filters to buy, I suggest that you consider getting, is the Nik collection. Now in my Nik collection we've got various things here. Things I use a lot are the Color FX Pro, I use the Sharpener Pro, and I occasionally use the Silver FX Pro for black and white shots. Today we're going to have a look at the Color FX Pro. So once this is loaded up, which is very easy to install on a PC or a Mac, you'll notice I'll already have okay, there's a good thing. Now as you can see, this bit here is the uncropped area, so we're going to remove that later. Don't panic about that. That's just the once we've used the warp tool, there's some hidden data there which we'll crop out later, but we're just looking at the way the image looks at the minute. So Pro contrast is very good. If I reset all the parameters here, this is the starting image, this is the one you've just seen in Photoshop. The dynamic contrast is very good because this is what makes it pop without over brightening it. As you can see, it can bring a lot of detail out into the shadow areas. You may not always want that, and I would just say use dynamic contrast sparingly. I'm going to put it at around about 24. I'm also going to slightly correct the contrast, which as you can see, if I over, as you can see, it does that. I'm going to do that at about 8 or so, maybe 9. The color cast correction is really handy also. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually colorblind, so it wouldn't be surprising if some of my photographs occasionally have a color cast on them. But this is my sort of get out of jail free card, which helps take any overly casted photographs, which is quite easily to do. As you can see, there's a slide that it changes. Again, with caution, I'm going to put it at 22. I think that will be absolutely fine. Now the other thing I like to do, you can stack filters. So I've finished with the Pro Contrast, so I also want to do something else, but this is called Brilliance and Warmth. So what this does, this is actually very nice for sunset shots, but it can also just give a little bit of a nice round feel to a photograph. I'm going to increase the warmth a little bit. Perceptual saturation will not overly saturated, but it will increase the saturation in the midtones, which I'm going to again just do only slightly, and I'm going to click the saturation up maybe 2 points there. Okay, so that's the original image. Okay, it's just a subtle change, just a subtle pop, and I think that gives quite a pleasing effect. So we're going to OK that out. So now it will apply those parameters to the image, put it into layers, compress them, and give me something as a finishing result here. I think the next thing we're going to do actually is crop this extra information out that you can't see on here, but you can obviously see along the bottom there. I've already got the crop tool selected over here. So once this image is saved back up into Photoshop, we'll apply the crop by simply just clicking on the image. Now you can see this is the extra bit we pulled out to get these sides straighter. They're not perfectly straight, but I think it's straight enough for this purpose. And I'm also going to just take that little bit that I need to crop off the bottom. Yeah, do you know what? I think that's absolutely fine. If you look at the rule of thirds as well, we've got the horizon perfectly on the third. And we also have the centre of the lighthouse slightly off the centre line. Better than fully in the centre. Of course, that's just a rule, but rules are meant to be broken, so only if it looks right. A guide is always have the focus of your photograph slightly off to the centre. Right, happy with that crop. Let's crop that out, and we've got rid of the extra bit of white along the bottom, and obviously we've taken this bit off the side here. Now, we haven't addressed this business with the noise. As you can see, it's quite noisy there. But you know, when you're at ISO 6400, you're going to get noise. It's something you just have to accept as a nighttime photographer. So we can make it a little better though. Now, in your filters, yes, of course, you have noise control, and you know, reduced noise works very well, but it works across the whole image. So again, my Nik collection here, I'm going to go down to Define 2. Now this is the noise reduction software. It has two settings, automatic and manual. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let it look at the whole image, look to see where it thinks it needs to work, and see what its suggestion is. Now this is the most noisy bit here, as you can see by the loop. There's a loop down here. It shows the before and after. Up here it's analysing it, it's looking at the whole image. So what we should see is a difference, and as you can see immediately, there is a difference there. It's smoothed out a lot of the image. Now, to be fair, it's smoothed out a lot of the stars as well. If you look at the loop down in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see it has taken a lot of the noise out, but the stars are still there. You know, there's still detail down here. It's selected these three parts as its five parts, my apologies, as its sample areas, and I think it's done a reasonably good job. I'm quite happy with that, so we're going to apply that, and this will take away the noise. Now there's lots and lots and lots of different ways to take noise out. One of the other ways that I use is going and breaking these down into its channels. So if you look at channels here, you'll see that certain colours have more noise than others, and you would select that particular one, which one has the most noise in, and look at it that way. But we're not going to do it. That's maybe for another day. We'll go back to its normal way. So here we go. So all those layers can be flattened because they're just the different things that have been applied to it, and yeah, I'm reasonably happy with that. Now the final thing is sharpening. Now there is a very good sharpening tool in here, which is here. Unsharpen mask. It's been around forever. It's a good way to add sharpness to your image. Please use it sparingly, and also be aware of the size of your photograph. If you're printing it out, the sharpness needs to be different to if you're not printing it out or it's just for screen. So I think that's pretty much okay. So 80% at one radius. It's not over sharpened it at all. So I'm going to hit OK, and that's just sharpened it nicely. Okay, the final thing is I'm going to actually save that. We'll save that. And now I'm going to prepare it for presentation on Facebook. The first thing I'll do is actually open my... first thing I'm going to do is actually reduce the size. So what I'm going to do is go image size, and as you can see it's a very big file at the moment. We're going to drop the resolution to 72. 72 is almost the perfect resolution for anything you're going to do online. I'm going to make the width 1200 pixels, which is a good enough size for you guys to see, but not too small. We're going to apply that. Zoom it back into its 100%. Yeah, I'm happy with that. A little bit of noise here, but we can deal with that again. If I was to print this off for a canvas or for a frame photo, I'd spend more time getting rid of the noise on this side. Certainly would, but I think for the purpose of this it's fine. The other tool you can use, but I don't use it too often, is the burn and the dodge tool. Now burn tool, if we click on that, and I'm just going to drop the exposure down to about that. What this does is darken certain parts of the image. So if I was to pick the shadows here and do this. It's darkening some of the darker bits in the Milky Way there. And then you can also dodge it. Again, make sure it's quite a low value. I'd put it probably about 4. This will lighten the highlights like that. It makes the Milky Way stand out, and it doesn't look over processed. Okay, so I'm going to put the stamp, my tag on, my watermark. So I've opened it recently, so I'm going to open this up, and this is it here with a transparent background. Simply select it, Control-C selects, move back to the image, and edit and paste. And here it is. Oh, and we're going to put it into place. Never a perfect place to put it. We'll put it down there where it's not spoiling much of the photograph. And we're going to change the opacity of that layer down so it's visible but not obtrusive. There we go. Yeah, that'll do. So finally, I need to save it in that format, so please have a look at Save for Web. Photoshop tries to make it as easy as possible. It'll save it as a PNG format. I choose PNG 24. Okay, I've called my preset Facebook because it's all the settings are there, but it's pretty much how it was out of the tin. Going to save it. Going to save it to the desktop, and we're done. So I hope that was useful. Hope that was interesting, and thanks for the support of coming to see my page. It's very flattering when I get all the nice comments. And if you like these videos, you'll have to let me know, and I'll certainly do more of them.